The best of Money Matters. The Hot Seat.
Welcome to the Hot Seat. I'm Hongbin Jeong. Private property owners who sell their homes within 4 years of purchase will be subject to a seller's stamp duty at a higher rate. The 4 years is now up from the 3 years previously. Such tighter rules took effect for all private residential properties purchased on and after midnight on July 4th. But the move, aimed at cooling speculation and curbing sub-sale activity, has sparked a fresh wave of debate across the property landscape. Supporters argue that it's a necessary step to stabilize the market, discouraging flipping and promoting long-term ownership. But critics warn that the policy may reduce liquidity, tighten resale supply, and unintentionally push prices even higher, making homes less accessible, especially for younger buyers. So, does the 4-year SSD cool the market or choke it? Is it promoting stability or fueling affordability concerns? So, for today's debate, we'll focus on whether the revised 4-year SSD holding period inflates or stabilizes Singapore's property market. Before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this debate, here's a disclaimer. The views and arguments presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they are here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. Now, without further ado, joining us today is Nicholas Mak, who's a Chief Research Officer at MOGUL SG, to share with us why the changes made will stabilize the property market here in Singapore. And we also have Stanley Wong, who is the Senior Associate District Director of Propnex, to tell us otherwise. Welcome to the show, both. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. All right. Well, just to start off here, what were your initial thoughts of the increase in seller's stamp duty and holding period? Was it necessary given the current conditions of the property market? Nicholas, maybe we can start with you on your thoughts.
Well, I think it was a bit of a surprise, partly because the private homes price growth is slowing down. But then again, the government may be looking into the near future. That means they are doing something that's a bit preemptive. The reason is because the percentage of sub-sale, that means basically people buying and selling the property before it's completed, is gradually rising as a percentage of total sales. Take, for example, 9 months ago, it was about 4.2%. That means we're talking about 4.2% of all the private housing transactions were sub-sale. It has climbed up to about 4.5% in the last quarter. So I think the government is expecting that, especially in the next 12 months, we could see more property launches that's coming up. It could lead to even higher number of sub-sales going forward.
Okay. Well, Stanley, what were your thoughts?
Well, the move isn't totally unexpected. As what you have mentioned, the growth for sub-sale is actually from 16.7% from 2023 to 2024. And in Q1, in 2025, 321 units were transacted. In fact, this is actually a calibrated reversion of the SSD in 2017.
Right.
If you base primarily on the sub-sale transactions, I personally feel that it could be timely.
Okay. Well, in theory, the 4-year SSD could see less speculative buying and fewer sub-sale transactions. With longer periods before you can flip a property for profit, more buyers will be in the owner-occupier category. That, in turn, may lead speculative buyers to drop out of the picture if they have to hold for longer. So, Stanley, since the SSD is designed to reduce short-term speculation, how exactly does it lead to price inflation rather than help stabilize the market?
Thank you. In my opinion, by discouraging sellers and shrinking the supply of homes for sale, SSD may inadvertently prop up property prices, contrary to its intent of stabilizing effect. Basic economics dictates that when supply is constrained and demand stays constant, prices tend to rise. Indeed, Singapore saw its resale transaction volumes dip after SSD, yet overall prices indicates stayed resilient. Industry observers noted that when buyers have fewer choices in the resale market, their interest gets concentrated on whatever units are available or shifts to new launches.
Okay.
This might push up demand for private properties in those segments, sustaining or even accelerating price increases. In short, SSD cooled the volume of sales, but might not necessarily the prices.
But Nick, what if speculators can hold out for 4 years? If they can just wait out the 4-year period, are we really reducing speculation or just delaying it, possibly creating a future price hike?
Well, I think that if I'm a speculator, I would hold out for 4 years under the new regime, because what's one more year anyway? Especially for bigger condominium projects, they take a bit longer. Sometimes from the time that the show flat doors are open to the time that the buyer gets the key, it could be 4 years. And I think that's one of the strategies that some of the short-term investors are using. They are buying the units brand new from the show flat, from the developers at the show flat, and because they only need to put down a down payment and then it's progressive payment. They don't have to come up with the full price of the property. So it's a bit easier on the pockets. And then when the time that they get the keys is also the time when the SSD period is over. So they can sell it without any SSD and then repeat the same process again. So they can usually sell at quite a handsome profit. And this actually encourages some of these short-term investors to enter the market. When I don't think it will really longer SSD period, I don't think it will lead to a spike. If you may indulge me a bit, I did a bit of research.
Okay.
Now, over the 10 years period, over the past 10 years, on average, developers sold about 8,768 private homes. So let's say 8,700. They also sold about 1,800 over executive condominium, brand new ones. And the HDB launched about 18,300 over BTO flats. You put it all up, it comes to about 28,900 over homes. On average, also in Singapore, we see about 21,000 people getting married for the first time.
Right.
So we're talking about a family formation rate of about 21,000 people every year over the last 10 years on average. It tends to fluctuate between 20,000 and 22,000. So about 21,000 is right. Which means that if you take that 28,900 new homes sold every year, minus the 21,000 new families created, we have 7,800 excess homes that are bought by people who are not intending to live in it. That means it comes to about 27% of the new homes and HDB flats are bought. HDB flats, you have to live in it because of the 5-year MOP. But it means that a significant percentage, almost 1/4 of the homes sold, are actually for investment. And some of them are short-term investment. I don't think it will lead to a spike because of this huge number of homes that's been transacted in the market, including, we're not even talking about secondary market, resale market yet, but just in the primary market alone. So yes, a significant proportion are bought for investment, and the government needs to watch that.
Right. Well, speaking of which, the new SSD is made to discourage short-term resales, especially sub-sales of new launches, significantly reducing available supply in the near term. Data show that sub-saling flipping saw a significant increase from 178 units in 2020 to 1,306 in 2024. So, Stanley, if the SSD clearly reduce sub-sale activity, how can it be blamed for, inflating prices rather than stabilizing the market and protecting home buyers from speculation-driven surges?
Well, in my opinion, while SSD might reduce short-term flipping, but it might not fix the roots of the imbalance between supply and demand.
Okay.
SSD decreases supply because owners would naturally want to sell, especially those upgrading, downgrading, or needing to move for work. They will just hold back just to avoid paying the penalty. Fewer resale listings equal tighter market. Buyers forced to bid higher for limited auctions. So ironically, one might say SSD penalty blocks healthy market turnover, leaving prices higher than they would be in a freer market.
Well, given the policy targets sub-sale transactions heavily, Nick, does it risk reducing investor participation and potentially leading to market stagnation?
Not really. Based on what I said earlier, about 27% of the new homes sold by the private and public sectors are actually bought by investors. And so we do see a fairly liquid market. And furthermore, the SSD, if you can broadly classify the different types of cooling measures, additional buyer stamp duty, the total debt servicing ratio, loan restrictions, the various types, like for example, loan to value ratio, and the SSD. The SSD is actually the weakest of the four. So by the government just simply tweak it slightly, I'll see it more as a warning shot that more could come rather than something that is really there to cool the market. Because it is the weakest of the 4 different types of cooling measures, and they didn't increase it significantly. Like they could have jumped from 3 years to 5 years. Right. Just like the SSD 2 years ago, ABSD 2 years ago, they increased the ABSD for foreigners from 30% to 60%, and it really shocked the market, right? And the foreign participation in our private housing market dropped. This one is just a warning shot.
Well, on the other hand, Stanley, couldn't weakening the SSD risk returning us to, boom-bust cycles where speculative flipping drives unsustainable price growth?
Real estate cycles don't just depend on flippers.
Okay.
They depend on fundamentals like income growth, interest rates, and population trends. A mild level of resale turnover is healthy. It lets the market self-correct. An overly harsh SSD locks owners in during booms and busts. Supplies can't adjust naturally, so prices become sticky. True stability comes from liquidity and flexibility, not forced hoarding. Many mature markets achieve stability without such heavy transaction taxes.
Okay. Well, Nick, earlier you mentioned that if you were the seller, you would hold out for 4 years. So, by discouraging sales within those 4 years, then aren't we effectively reducing market liquidity? I mean, how can a less liquid market be considered stable?
Actually, of the different types of sales, the primary market new sales, resale, and sub-sale, which is a subset, sub-sale is actually the smallest group. That means there are a lot more people who are selling resale condominiums and HDB flats in the market than sub-sale. So by reducing the sub-sale, right now it's about 4.5% of total transactions. Even if the government were to reduce it slightly, it's not really going to dry up the market, in terms of liquidity or the choices among buyers. Secondly, is that just because they implemented sometime last week, we are only going to see this reduction in sub-sale probably 4 years from now. Right. Because the people who bought last month, 2 years ago or so, they are under the old regime, which means they can still sell the property after 3 years without suffering any SSD. So we are still going to see sub-sale happening for the next 4 years.
Okay, makes sense. Well, with resale supply expected to tighten due to SSD penalties, some analysts expect upward pressure on resale prices. So, Nick, if fewer homes are being resold because of the SSD, doesn't this limit buyer options and push prices higher, especially for those who can't afford new launches?
I think that there's still a huge choices, especially in the resale market. Yes, if they can't afford some of the prices of the new launches, they can always turn to the resale market. And the largest resale market is actually the HDB resale market. So there's still ample choices all over Singapore. The only thing is, how does it affect some of the buyers, you see? If the buyers are genuine home buyers, typically they will own their home, based on my research, more than 5 years. Some will even wait until 7 to 10 years. That means only when there is a significant change in the family dynamics, like the children going to primary schools or they have a change in job, then they may consider moving to a different location. But the question is, will this 4 years SSD affect genuine home buyers who are buying the property and then perhaps thinking of moving? I think it's a small number. Perhaps a small number might be affected. Then I guess that they will have to weigh their options, or perhaps they can appeal to see, perhaps real genuine, they may have to migrate or something, that they may have to appeal for an exemption.
Right. Well, ultimately, the SSD aims to promote long-term ownership and reduce property churn. So, Stanley, if the SSD encourages people to, stay longer in their homes, isn't that a healthier behavior for long-term market stability rather than encouraging quick flips?
Theory, yes, but in practice, it's artificial.
Okay.
From the ground sensing, people they need to move within 3 to 4 years, like job relocations, family needs, or personal circumstances. SSD might hold them to the property even when it's not the best choice. So real housing needs don't match real transactions. This creates pent-up supply, which is dumped back after the lock-in period, adding sudden jolts instead of a steady turnover. Stability means people can buy and sell when they need to, not because they are bound by a penalty.
All right. Well, some great insights from both of you. So to wrap up our discussion here, looking beyond short-term price movements and market mechanics, how do you believe the 4-year SSD ultimately affects Singaporeans' ability to own a home? And what is the bigger social impact of this policy? Maybe, Nick, we can start with you.
Hopefully, this policy will be able to slow down the rate of price growth, especially in the private housing market, so that homes can be more affordable for local residents.
All right. And Stanley?
Well, I think for the social impact, it really doesn't affect a lot because, like what Nicholas has said, it's only a small numbers. So overall, this is just a short warning. I think what follows next, well, it depends on what's coming up and how is the resale transactions coming up after this.
All right. I guess we'll just have to wait and see and whether or not this 4-year holding period will stabilize or inflate the property market. Thank you so much both for joining me today.
Thank you for
It's our
having us.
pleasure.
Thank you. We've been speaking to Nicholas Mak, who's a Chief Research Officer at MOGUL SG, and Stanley Wong, who's a Senior Associate Director at Propnex. Thank you to all those who tuned in on our social media platforms and on air as well. Tune in again next week for another Hot Seat. I've been your host, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.